Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 302 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin. I at Falcoholic Kevin. Joined finally back on Falcoholic Live. We have Adnan Ikic, my co-host at Say Which Way. Adnan, I know you've had a busy month and you've been on some other shows, but first Falcoholic Wednesday appearance, in a little bit. So we're happy to have you back. How you doing? How you been?
Good. Yeah, I was in Japan for the most part. I mean, last week I was on a work trip, but before then I was in Japan, so that's why I wasn't on the alcoholic. But I feel like that's a justified excuse. It's about a 13-hour time change, so it would have been, I think, 8 a.m. over there or
Yeah.
9 a.m. over there, which actually doesn't sound too bad. Our European viewers are up at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Watching if they are. But yeah, definitely happy to be back. I watched the Falcons fall flat on their faces at like 3 a.m. in Kyoto, so that wasn't really fun. But then we had the Eagles game.
Yeah.
We had that Eagles game last week, which was really fun. And now it's net 1-2. Now it's like let's stack some wins together.
Yeah, exactly. It not a big deal. It's funny because it's like at the end of the day, didn't it? I don't think the beginning of the season went as planned. Certainly, I mean, I think we were much more thinking that the Falcons would be able to beat the Steelers and probably should have, but they did not. They lost to the Steelers in week 1, but then they go on the road and beat the Eagles in week 2, which actually, now that we look back, probably by far the most important of the 3 games in terms of standings, in terms of potential tiebreakers, playoff picture type stuff, if we ever get to that being a legitimate thing for this team. And then, of course, they do lose to the Chiefs, on Sunday Night Football. Not, kind of a tough game, frustrating end, right? We talked about that a lot. We're not going to linger too much on that game. Obviously, we did have Adnan a bit on the post-game show for that. But, we're going to move ahead to the NFC South gauntlet, right? Because the gauntlet begins now. Falcons go on the road in week 4 to play the New Orleans Saints. Or no, they don't go on the road. They're in Atlanta, New Orleans Saints. Then next week, the Bucks, the week after, the Panthers. So we're going to get a look at every single one of the NFC South teams back to back to back for the first 3 games of the season. Like for the NFC South. So at the end of this stretch, we'll know where the Falcons stand in this division because they'll have a head-to-head matchup against every one of these teams. It could go very well or it could go very poorly, as you guys know from anyone who watches the Falcons, that is absolutely a thing. But the Falcons have an opportunity here, obviously, over the next 3 games to take complete control of the division, to hand every single one of their rivals a big fat L, and for the Falcons to potentially, if they were to sweep this 3-game stretch, to go to 4-2, which would be the best case scenario, obviously, for this team. Not sure how realistic that it is that they sweep the whole series, but the first 2 games definitely look a little bit more important, and we'll see how the Panthers develop over that time period. But we're going to get into all that. We're going to get into, unfortunately, the injuries, because the Falcons had a couple on the offensive line this weekend that were significant. They've brought in some familiar faces as depth. It also looks like Caleb McGarry's injury probably not long-term, which is great. Drew Dahlman's a little bit more long-term, but not season-ending, so that is the silver lining there. Before we dive in fully, I want to bring you guys a real quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. And if you're interested in this particular game, Falcons taking on the Saints, I always look at the over-unders with this team, and I think this is another under week. I believe the Falcons have been under every single week so far, but pretty much all NFL games have, honestly. So that's probably where I'd lean on this one. I don't bet the money line or the spread on Falcons games because that's too dramatic. You do too much with your heart. But I think the over-under is a little bit less heart betting and more just looking at the numbers of this team. But definitely an interesting one this week. But no matter what you want to bet on, BetOnline's got every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. And if you think you know your stuff, they've got a new $200,000 mega contest. You pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of that $200,000 and when the game's over. BetOnline's got a new online casino. They got blackjack. They got poker. Over 150 slots games available. So head to that website today, betonline.ag, to get in on the action. Make sure when you sign up to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BetOnline. Bet online, the game starts here. All right, Adnan. Well, is there anything else you wanted to touch on from the Chiefs game? Because I know you came on the post-game show, got to say your piece, but it's been a few days. Is there anything else you want to touch on from that before we sort of turn the page to week 4 here?
Just that overall, I like the performance that the team had. Like, obviously, we want more than 17 points on offense, but I sort of understand it when you lose Drew Dahlman and when you lose Caleb McGarry so quickly. One after it was like one right after the other too in that second quarter. It sort of deteriorated the entire offense. Throwing, Storm Norton and Ryan Newsel in there, and Norton and Newsel will likely start this week. We'll get to that later on in the show, but I feel like it's different when you have a week of practice and preparation, practicing with the first teamers versus when you're just thrown out there in the middle of the game, which, that of course is the job, but it's still different, right? Like it's still much more difficult to do so, especially against a very talented Chiefs defense. But overall, the team put up a great fight. They left it very late. They were screwed over by some very questionable officiating on that Kyle Pitts defensive pass interference, which wasn't called. But that's just sort of, the name of the game when you're playing the Chiefs. Like, you know that there's going to be some plays where, the refs take their liberties. It's like playing Tom Brady back in the day. I don't think that one play is the reason why the team lost, but still, it sort of proved that you can hang with the big boys, because even though the Chiefs offense isn't what it was a few years ago, this defense still holds them to 22 points. The Chiefs are still an undefeated football team that won the last 2 Super Bowls. That's probably far and away the best team in the NFL still. And the Falcons, had them on the ropes more or less at the very end of that game. It didn't work out, but 1-2 is on schedule. Well, we talked about it before the season. We went one after the other, or one game after the other, making our season predictions. And you and I both had this team at 1-2. Now, granted, we both had this team beating the Steelers and losing to the Eagles and Chiefs. It worked out better this way, winning the NFC game and beating the Eagles head to head. So, 1-2 was, I think, expected by most people. It's no need to panic, because this was on paper your toughest schedule, or your toughest sequence of the season. But now we move into the NFC South, and that 1-2 is just fine as long as you take care of business against the Saints at home and against the Bucs at home, and as long as you take care of business against the Panthers, whom you should be beating twice this season. It's a different story if the team does not get it done over these next few weeks, because then they'll see themselves in a really bad hole. But overall, I like what I saw from that Chiefs game, even though obviously it would have been really, really nice to be 2-1 here, especially because that this team would have gotten that national credit. Not that it really matters, but man, this would have been a fun week in the media had they beaten the Chiefs this week.
Yeah, it would have been fun. There would have been a lot of great storylines we could talk about. But honestly, like, you look around the league, I think the consensus is pretty clearly that the Falcons got robbed of an opportunity to win the game. And, if you look at silly things like power rankings and all that, no one's really penalized the Falcons for the loss, which is rare to see, especially like early in the season when every like win-loss is so like impactful to your rating, right? But pretty much universally, I think teams look at this as like, this is better than we expected the Falcons to do against the Saints. So I think they're definitely on track for what we typically like from this team, and what we would be expecting here. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you wish you could beat the champs and get that giant morale boost going into Saints week, but it not the end of the world that you didn't. Obviously, not a division game, not even a conference game. It's probably the Steelers and the Chiefs, two of the least impactful games on the schedule in terms of actual standings. So, this is where it gets important here going into week 4. This is the games that really, really count. These are the most, I would argue that these next two games could be the most important 2 game stretch of the schedule. Like, because if the Falcons sweep these two, they'll be atop the NFC South when entering week 6. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If they sweep these 2 games, they'll be leading the NFC South with a perfect 2-0 record. If they win all 3, they get that Panthers win at the end of the gauntlet, then they'll be leading with a 3-0 record. And they'll, who knows what'll happen to the other NFC South teams during that span, but it doesn't really matter because as long as the Falcons take care of business, they will be on top and get those critical division wins in an NFC South that I think we're still very much feeling out what this division is. I think the Saints' hot start, probably not an accurate projection of what that team really is, although it was impressive. The same thing with the Bucs, that not maybe the most accurate portrayal of these teams, but it's hard to say exactly how much of it was fiction and how much of it is fact. And how the Falcons look against these two teams over the next 2 weeks is going to tell us a lot about the state of these NFC South teams. But before we dive into the gauntlet itself, because probably spend all night talking about these NFC South teams and especially our hatred for the Saints, that's probably going to take up at least a 20-minute segment. These offensive line injuries, let's get to that real quick before we go too far. Caleb McGarry goes out during the game and is replaced by Storm Norton. That ends up not being a huge deal. Storm does a good job, but then 4 plays later, Drew Dahlman goes out and is out for the game. Now, McGarry's injury is considered day-to-day, and I think given what we've seen from Storm Norton in the past, I think everyone was pretty much like, okay, we'll be all right. The run game's going to take a hit, but Storm Norton's, going to be okay. And then Drew Dahlman's, I think, where things get a little bit sketchier because, Ryan Newsell's more untested. He's a younger player. And the center is so critical to this scheme and obviously the offensive line cohesion as a whole. You could tell that was the injury that really started to cause problems for this offense in this game and could cause problems going forward. But what do you think about the losses of those two guys? And what do you think about their immediate replacements and how they're going to perform over this critical stretch of games?
I mean, yeah, I feel like Dahlman was a bigger loss than Caleb McGarry just because Storm Norton is proven, right? We remember it last season. Storm Norton, when he went in there, he damn near looked better than McGarry at some stretches. Certainly, like as a pass protector. Now, Caleb McGarry is a better run blocker, but with Dahlman, I feel like Drew Dahlman is one of the more underrated Falcons over the past couple of years because Drew Dahlman had his critics, certainly, especially going into last season of does he deserve to just be given that starting center role with no competition? And I mean, in fairness, Matt Hennessy, I think the idea was for there to be a competition, but then Matt Hennessy, old friend of the team, signed back to the practice squad. He got hurt very early on in training camp, was down for the season, and Drew Dahlman had a really, really strong season last year, and he's had a couple of really strong seasons. He is one of the best run blocking centers, one of the best run blocking interior offensive linemen in the NFL. Now, granted, he's not a perfect pass blocker, but I feel like what he does, as a run blocker more than makes up for it. And Drew Dahlman is one of the key reasons why this offensive line has been, as highly touted and as highly ranked as it has been the last couple of years. Like, I don't think anyone would really sit here and say that the offensive line has been a problem in Atlanta's struggles over the last couple of years. And that's because, they have a lot of cohesion and, Drew Dahlman was sort of that, I don't want to say that last piece because, he was here before Matthew Bergeron, for example, but he was one of those key cogs that has sort of made it work. And to now lose him, it's a big loss. I feel like it's going to be a bigger loss than we expect. And to lose both he and McGarry, I feel like that's going to really hurt the run game overall. Even though with McGarry, I feel like Storm Norton can sort of give you as much impact or damn near as much impact. Ryan Newsel is unproven. Ryan Newsel, we like Ryan Newsel.
Newsflash. Yep, big fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Like big Ryan Newsel fans on this show. We've seen him in the preseason before. We've seen him, in camp, and he's a very, very fine, depth center, I would say. And, the team really likes him. They kept him. They gave him I think the exclusive rights free agency tag, this past off season. But I feel like there's gonna be a bit of a fall off going from Drew Dahlman to Ryan Newsel, especially in the run game. And it's gonna be a storm that this team sort of has to weather a little bit. And, I don't think that this offense will be at its maximum capacity until Drew Dahlman gets back. And unfortunately, high ankle sprain, the worst kind of ankle sprain.
Yeah.
Drew Dahlman was almost immediately placed on injured reserve. So, it's going to be the next 4 games where Ryan Newsel, you're sort of thrown to the wolves a little bit. You got to face Vita Vea in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
The Saints defensive
Maybe. I
line.
guess we'll see if he's healthy, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, he theoretically he could be back. Yeah.
Yeah, possibly the Saints defensive line is very good.
Yep.
And it's the NFC South. You have all 3 divisional games over the next 3 weeks, and then I think you get the Seattle Seahawks, if I remember correctly, after the Panthers. And the Seahawks defense looks stout, to start the season. And I think that's one of the reasons why the team went out and signed Matt Hennessy, who is familiar, with the rest of these offensive linemen. He's familiar with Coach Dwayne Ledford. I think the team isn't going to give Ryan Newsel the longest leash if he struggles. Where if Newsel doesn't look great over the next couple of weeks, or if he looks bad, then I think the team won't really hesitate to throw Hennessy in there and see what he's got.
Yeah, no, I think that what the team did in terms of depth offensive line, this is probably like the best guys you could reasonably get at this point in the season. Like, I think maybe other than quarterback, offensive line is the thinnest position in the NFL. There's just not enough offensive linemen that are good. And, for whatever reason, I mean, everybody knows Hennessy was a starter here, not the best starter, but he was definitely a reliable depth piece, kind of played the Ryan Newsel role for this offense. Ended up missing the entire 2023 season, his final year on his rookie contract. Got hurt in training camp, missed the whole season. Ended up signing with the Eagles at this offseason. So he really has only been away from the team for a few months. It feels like longer because he missed all of 2023 with an injury, but he's only really been away from the team since March. So not that crazy of a reunion, certainly. And, we'll see what the team, I think, clearly was more interested in Newsel than Hennessy. That's why they brought back Newsel and let Hennessy walk. Also, Hennessy got more money than Newsel. He ended up getting waived by the Eagles at the end of final cuts, but he's a guy that, I think we've seen is a capable center, not necessarily an impact player, but it's good to have that option in case Newsel falters or in case Newsel gets hurt. I mean, like, yes, he's the next man up, but like, it doesn't mean he's immune from injury either. So it's always good to have. I personally don't think Jovan Gwynn is an NFL caliber offensive lineman. I'm pretty concerned about what we've seen from him so far. He was going to be a big like outlier because of his size. He's like 6'2", barely 300 pounds. Like, it was always, I think, going to be an uphill battle for Gwynn to make it in the NFL. I know the team really likes him. And, like, I think he moves super well, so you love to see that. But I think having Hennessy available in case Newsel has to miss any time or Newsel struggles, I like that a lot better than I like the proposition of Jovan Gwynn going out there. He's just so small. And you see it in the preseason. He just gets dominated on a lot of snaps. So, at center, you feel good with that. And then Elijah Wilkinson, like, I think people forget, Wilkinson was a solid starter for the Falcons after an initial sort of rough beginning for this team. Started 9 games, I think, in 2022 it was. And started to look pretty good. ends up on IR, misses the entire second half of the season, and then goes to the Cardinals, where he was actually a key player for them last year. He had to play, I think, a fair amount because they had injuries. And actually, I think Wilkinson is here as like an extra tackle in case, we see issues with Storm Norton or another tackle injury. I know they got Brandon Parker, but I think Wilkinson actually has a better track record overall than Brandon Parker does. So I feel pretty good about these guys as depth offensive linemen, though. I think they've boosted their interior line depth in a meaningful way in mid-September, which is actually really hard to do. There's just not that many quality guys out there in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you never want an injury. Like you want your offensive line to stay as healthy as possible, and I think that's even taking it back to the last time the Falcons were good in 2016. I know they were good in 2017, but that magical year in 2016. Remember, one of the most underrated aspects of it was offensive line stayed healthy all season. Like there was not a single injury along the O line, and it continued into, and then like in 2017, I think it was Ryan Schrader got hurt early on.
Yeah.
And that was the first like major O line injury the team had in a couple of years. But luckily Caleb McGarry seems day to day. Like a sprained MCL is no joke. Like a sprained MCL, it's a painful injury. But obviously these guys are all very tough. But I feel like given the diagnosis of what the injury was for McGarry, it coming out as it's just day to day is absolutely the best case scenario. And Raheem Morris confirmed that at this time he will not be placed on short-term IR. So the idea is that he will be back within the next few weeks, at least within the next 4 games. My guess, if he doesn't play against the Saints, will be that he likely misses the game against the Bucs as well, just because that game's on Thursday night. And after that Bucs game, you get that 10 days of rest. But that's just me speculating. I don't have any inside reports. Maybe, hopefully, McGarry plays this weekend. But I don't think it'll be the end of the world if he doesn't. But I'm certainly way more worried about center than I am right tackle. I feel like Storm Norton has sort of earned the right to have that confidence instilled in him, given what we saw from him last season, and just given and the team has that confidence in him as well, because you saw he had some run with the first teamers during training camp. Like he was switching. Of course, it was Caleb McGarry's role, but Storm Norton was switching out with him, in the 2-minute drill in that Mercedes-Benz practice. He was getting some of those first-team reps in walkthroughs. He was getting some first-team reps in relief of Jake Matthews, at left tackle in walkthroughs as well. So the team is certainly very confident in Storm Norton, and I'm pretty confident in Storm Norton. But Ryan Newsel, we'll see. Like, and now's the time. Now's the time to showcase yourself.
Make some money. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
look, like this is a great opportunity for him with a very solid offensive line surrounding him, especially on the interior. I think obviously him being able to have a week of practice with the starters is going to be significant. I really don't think that Newsel is going to be a problem. I think it's more like you lose a lot in the run game with Dahlman out. Dahlman, I think, was such a unique athlete at the position, such a good run blocker. Newsel in like 45 snaps, I think it was, allowed just one pressure against the Chiefs, and how good their defensive line is. So, I think I think Newsel's a perfectly good pass protector. I think he's just not the impact player that Dahlman was in the run game, and because of that, it's going to cause issues for the run game. The Falcons are probably going to have to lean more on the passing game with these two guys in. The good news is I think like Storm Norton, probably about as good of a pass protector as McGarry is. You're not really taking a hit there. I know some people think like he's like better as a pass protector than McGarry. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable saying that yet, but we know he's not as good of a run blocker. But with Newsel, again, I think he's not really a drop off in pass pro, but you lose a lot in the run game. So I think that there's, they can weather this, I guess, is the short answer. And McGarry should be back. I think by the end of this gauntlet, he'll probably be back. Obviously, if he could be back for the Bucks, that would be great. Since the Thursday night game probably gonna be pretty tough, but we're gonna see. It's not gonna be easy. It's something you have to overcome. But look, you have to do this in the NFL. You're very rarely gonna be fully healthy, if not, never fully healthy. So you have to find ways. Everybody's hurting. Look at the Saints injury report this week. All right, they just put their center Eric McCoy on IR. He has a high ankle sprain, I think, or something similar to that. So he's out for the foreseeable future. Cesar Ruiz, their other interior offensive lineman, he did not practice today. Linebacker Demario Davis did not practice today with a hamstring injury, so that I think is extremely concerning for New Orleans. Cornerback Alante Taylor didn't practice with an illness, so he's probably going to play. Usually guys with illnesses are usually able to play, but it depends on how severe it is, I guess. And then Kamara did not practice with a hip/rib injury. Again, I don't think Kamara's necessarily in danger of missing it. Usually when they list like multiple injuries like that, it's more like pain management, rest type stuff. We'll see how it develops. But I think like they could be down multiple starting offensive linemen too. And Demario Davis with a hamstring. I mean, that's very concerning.
Yeah, I feel like with Kamara, it's one of those like wink, wink, like we're going to give him some rest because we just gave him 29 touches against the Eagles type thing because he had a heavy ass workload in that game. But yeah, I mean, we're definitely not seeing McCoy. That was a pretty bad injury that he suffered. I don't think we see Ruiz, and then Demario Davis. Like hamstring injuries are a bitch. Like in the NFL, like those can linger. Those can be multi-week injuries, especially for guys over the age of 30. I mean, you saw it with Adam Thielen, in the Panthers. Like he caught a touchdown pass from Andy Dalton, and came up holding his hamstring, and now he's on IR. So we'll see. It will be a big help for the Falcons if Davis is unable to play. But
right,
yeah, like this is the NFL. Like it's the nature of the beast. It's a contact sport. It's a violent sport, and that's why you have to build up your depth, and that's why it's so important to hit on those draft picks, hit on those late draft picks, get those good cheap free agent signings. And the best teams aren't only the teams with the high end talent. They're the teams that can sort of weather the storm when they get hurt. And the resolve of the Falcons is being tested now. It sucks having two very plus run defenders out at the same time if Caleb McGarry is out. But they just sort of have to figure it out because nobody's going to feel sorry for you.
No, that's the thing. Like, I mean, you can definitely like understand the outcome of some games because of injuries. Like, I mean, I think no one would argue that the Falcons weren't impacted by the loss of two offensive linemen in one drive. But you have to win. The NFL, you don't get a sticker or a participation ribbon for being down guys. It's just what you just have to figure out a way to do it. And Falcons are going to be tested here. The Saints sounds like they're going to be tested as well. At this point in the season, nobody's fully healthy anymore. So we're going to see how that develops on the injury front, but definitely a lot to monitor for New Orleans. With Atlanta, the Falcons did have put guys on injured reserve over the last few weeks, but the only person actively not practicing for Atlanta as of Wednesday is Caleb McGarry. He did not participate, which is not surprising, but we'll have to see how that develops over the course of the week. I would not put any amount of money, even a penny, on McGarry playing on Sunday. The best you could probably hope for is that he could make a miraculous recovery for Thursday Night Football. Even that, I think, is stretching it. But, I think it's going to be a big test. It's going to be a big test for this team in a lot of ways. But I've seen it mentioned in the chat, and, we saw the Saints really come down to earth against the Eagles, which I was kind of surprised by. I thought the Eagles offense would do better and the Eagles defense would do worse, but it was actually the opposite, where the Eagles offense basically handed New Orleans the game, like over and over and over again. And the New Orleans offense just couldn't do anything, and looked incredibly pedestrian, going up against the Eagles defense that the Falcons actually put up a lot of yards on, especially on the ground. But the New Orleans offense kind of fell apart last week, and you wonder, is that offensive line related? I mean, we definitely saw the Falcons have some issues going up against the Chiefs with those offensive line losses, but um, I do also wonder if Clint Kubiak was on a tear. That New Orleans offense was taking everyone by surprise. 3 weeks in, though, that's when it's like, we got 2 games of tape. Now we can really start to dissect this offense. And I wonder if that was part of it too, is that the Eagles got that tape and they were like, okay, we know how to stop this. And they did. I mean, they did a great job. So
I mean, that was a really weird game. Like watching, I feel like I was banging my head against the wall watching that game, and I can only imagine what Eagles fans were feeling because the Eagles should have sort of run away with that game, but they just kept shooting themselves in the foot over and over again. Like it started, they marched downfield and Jalen Hurts throws an interception in the end zone. And then later on, they just had so many of those dumb fourth down decisions where they, kept failing at them. And the most inexplicable of which was right before the half when they had that fake tush push handoff to Saquon Barkley. And I mean, I know that we, sort of buried the Falcons a little bit for that handoff to Bijan Robinson on a sweep on 4th and inches, and deservedly so. I still hate that call. But man, that play call looks genius when you compare it to, what the Eagles did, because that was also a handoff, but it was one of those where it was right before the half. The Eagles had one timeout left, 10 seconds on the clock, where the risk versus reward of that play was just so stupid. Like had they gotten it, had they converted on that 4th down, all it would have gotten them was 1 or 2 more shots to the end zone before they would have had to kick the field goal anyway.
yeah,
And they don't even do the tush push. They try to get cute with it. Saquon Barkley gets stuffed uh, on that jet sweep attempt, and they come away with nothing. Later on, Jake Elliott misses a 62-yard field goal, not an easy kick, of
no,
course,
no.
and they end up being saved by a Saquon Barkley home run,
Yep.
long touchdown run, and the Saints honestly, to their credit, were one busted play away from being 3-0 because that Dallas Goedert play, which pretty much changed the entire game, was the result of two Saints running into each other, and
Yeah.
Goddard caught it, went all the way down to like the
The
3-yard
yeah.
line on
Yeah.
a 60-yard catch. It was reminiscent a few years ago. I don't know if you remember it. I think it was 2018 or 2019 when the Saints were really, really good. And when they lost to the 49ers, the play where George Kittle on like 4th down and short, like caught it on, I think it was like a crossing route, got away from all the Saints and like went all the way downfield, set up the game winning field goal. That ended up, I think, costing the Saints in the standings. Might have even cost them a bye in the standings later
Yeah,
on.
it was significant. I remember that year. But
Yeah,
yeah.
but that's the play I was thinking of when I saw the Goddard play. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was the Eagles definitely should have run away with that game. It's just Nick
Yeah.
Sirianni and Jalen Hurts did every single thing possible to give it away, and Saquon Barkley sort of kept it in Philadelphia's hands. But yeah, what the Saints did on defense was it seemed like they dared Derek Carr to beat them. Like
Yeah.
they loaded the box, yeah, they made a concentrated effort to stop Alvin Kamara, which, to their credit, they did. Kamara averaged 3.3 yards per carry. He got 87 yards, but on 26 carries. Like they fed that man over and over again. It will be a bit more difficult for the Falcons with Taysom Hill playing. Um, but yeah, Derek Carr looked very pedestrian, 142 yards. Had a nice touchdown throw to Chris Olave to take the lead late on. But I feel like the Falcons are going to employ the same game plan of, stack the box, shut down the run game, and dare Derek Carr to beat you because, you know, I don't think he will.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the big things in this is, I think going into the season, we both, at least I definitely thought that the Saints' biggest problem was going to be the offensive line. And I think they got downright miraculous play thus far from Trevor Penning and a lot of these guys, Penning still not playing great, but not being the worst offensive lineman in the NFL definitely helped them. And like McCoy was having a great season. I mean, he was continuing without Ramczyk being there to be their best offensive lineman. So they had kind of defied expectations on the offensive line, but as soon as Eric McCoy went down, they had to shuffle things because they didn't really have a backup center. Their backup center was their left guard, so they move. I hate it when teams do that because it's like you're now changing two positions on your offensive line. I feel like that's a recipe for problems, and it was, and they struggled mightily after that. So Lucas Patrick moves over to center. They have to bring in, I believe it was Eli Udoh or something like that, to play left guard, who's a young guy. Obviously, he's going to struggle in his first real game action. And then at some point, I don't know when, Cesar Ruiz got hurt, or maybe that's a new injury. I mean, I don't know for sure, but so that's now three.
He got hurt in the game. I think it was a little bit later on, but
yeah.
He went down. He went down for sure.
So that's crazy. Now you've got two new guards and a new center. That's obviously big. So I mean, we'll see how that goes. I think they had kind of defied expectations, but we saw once those guys went out, they really started to struggle. So, this is that opportunity.
Maybe the Falcons will finally get some fucking pressure on the quarterback for once.
Interior pressure. That's the one thing I think we thought that they were going to be able to do, and they really haven't. The interior pressure has not been there outside of Grady Jarrett heroics. Onyemata has started to play better as a run defender, but he's been pretty slow to start this season. And I think we've seen good things from Judon, but I mean, the other edge position isn't exactly creating a lot of hope either. So, this is definitely a game where you got to get pressure on the quarterback because Derek Carr becomes a pretzel if he has pressure on him. If he doesn't have pressure on him, he looks good. This is how he's gotten all this money. It's because if he gets protected, he looks pretty good, and he can be good. But if you put pressure on him, he turns into a pumpkin. So that's what they need to do on Sunday, pretty clearly.
I think that chart was circulating of like the horizontal axis was the PFF pressure grade for each team, and then the vertical axis was the victory or the defensive line win rate against offensive linemen, and the Falcons were like bottom left.
It was like all the way to the left. Yeah.
Like all the way bottom left, like to the point where they were a complete outlier versus like the rest of the NFL, which was like at least like, somewhere toward the middle. And it's like, man, like it has been rough. The secondary has exceeded my expectations because Mike Hughes is playing much better than I thought he would. So definitely we gave him his flowers after that Chiefs game. Hopefully he keeps it up. I mean, the two safeties have been, as anticipated.
Yeah.
The linebackers, Troy Anderson hasn't gotten off to the best start. The team
much better in coverage this year. I will give him that. He's definitely come on in that regard, but yeah, the run game is still a struggle for him.
The team is missing Nate Landman, and unfortunately, Nate Landman is on IR, so it's going to be, at least 3 more games without him, all 3 NFC South games. I don't know. Did he go on IR before the Eagles game?
Yes. So it theoretically could be back next week, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be like week 5 at the earliest.
The earliest he can come back is, I would say, I think the earliest he can come back is the Panthers because he played week 1, right?
Right.
IR would knock him out for 4 weeks.
Right. You have to miss 4 games. Well, so if you're put on IR before the second game, that counts as one of your games. So 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Yeah. So then week 6 would be, yeah.
So he'd miss the next 2 against the Saints and the Bucks, but nonetheless, hopefully he gets back as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, the defensive line has been, they've been the big disappointments because they are not pressuring the quarterback, and it's sort of astounding to me that the defense has played as well as it has, despite the fact that the pass rush has, for the most part, been toothless. And I can only imagine. This was the big issue we were talking about in camp, right? Before the Matthew Judon signing of this. And I remember saying over and over again, this edge interior is probably the worst in the NFL. And I'm behind Matthew Judon. It has been like there is nobody that is stepping up uh, beyond him. Like Arnold Lebicady has done nothing so far.
Yeah.
Lorenzo Carter has done nothing so far. Um, along the interior guys aren't really helping out the edge guys. So this has to be the week where they really have to do something because against this banged up Saints, offensive line, if they play the way that they have been the past few weeks, then I think that'll signal to me that it's going to be, a rather long season and that this defense is going to be in for some serious regression because you can't really keep getting away with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stats around it are maybe a little bit harsher than the reality. I think when this team has had opportunities to rush the passer, like they've done a really good job, I think, in some specific situations where they've had advantageous stuff. But after Nate Landman left, they've been a bad run defense. So that's been, and I think they've kind of intentionally like given up the run to try to play, like especially against the Chiefs. I think they were playing they basically played too high the entire game. It's harder to stop the run when you're playing too high. We all know that. And I think they were just sort of willing to give up the run in order to keep Mahomes from throwing for 1,000,000 yards. And they did succeed in that. So that strategy did work. It's just, it led to tons of like the way that they played defense has worked, right? Like the defense has kept the score low. They've been doing more than enough for this team to win games. It's just that the offense really hasn't done their part, right? Like they've been dominated in time of possession every game. Now, part of that is that the defense outside of week 1 hasn't really stopped the run, but the other part is that the offense can't sustain drives, period. They're one of the NFL's worst third down offenses. I think they've converted 2 first downs, like 2 third downs in each of the last 3 games. Only 2 third down conversions in each of the last 3 games. Ridiculous. And I think that's like making everything look worse than it is on defense because you need your offense to pick up the slack. You can't leave your defense out to dry like this every single week. But we definitely expect more from this interior defensive line. Like the edge is what it is, right? We knew like Judon was huge because now they have one legitimate edge rusher. And I think Judon, to his credit, like he's clearly not he's playing like one side of the defensive line, and he's not doing a lot of stunts and twists and that stuff yet. He's still getting kind of caught up, but I think overall, like he'll be good and he'll be someone you can rely on. But like we need our 15 million plus guys on the interior to start wreaking havoc. Like last year, until Grady Jarrett got hurt in like week 7, I think it was, or week 8, like Jarrett and Onyemata were dominating every single week in the middle. And, maybe we're never going to get that again, but we need like something. Like if you could even get half of what that was, that would be great. It's just like right now that the interior is just way behind where we need them to be. And without Nate Landman, I think the run defense is starting to struggle off of that. So I wonder like if we're going to see some changes up front, because I think they were hoping they could kind of keep things the same without Landman and it would be okay. It really hasn't played out that way. They kind of need more beef up front. So I do wonder if we're going to start to see more like Eddie Goldman and stuff like that, because I think Eddie Goldman, to his credit, has been like solid when he's had to play. I mean, he's a run defender, but I mean, I think he's probably they might need that beef up front to stop a concerted effort against, on the ground, which is what we might get this week from the Saints. So,
and who knows, maybe Rook won't be a healthy scratch for once. I doubt it though.
At a certain point, we're going to have to see him. I mean, I feel very confident at some point we're going to see Rook, but I think they're probably going to try to wait if they can. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of a sequitur, but I kind of like really think that making Zach Harrison convert to the interior was a big mistake, because like there's way too many interior guys in this roster. Zach Harrison's barely playing. And we have no edge rush. And like, yeah, Zach Harrison can't like stand up and rush at like 275 pounds, but like he could play like a big end for you and give you a big boost on early downs and that sort of thing. I do wonder if like maybe we revert that change at some point and try to get Harrison like back out on the edge. I think that's probably going to be what we need to happen, because there's no other like legitimate edge rushers walking through that door. And like Ikic, I think as a pass rusher has been okay. There were some pretty egregious like holds that were missed on him, I felt, especially last week. But like I mean, that's how it is in the NFL sometimes. Like, you don't get calls all the time, especially holding calls. But, they can't be bad pass rushers and bad run defenders. Last year, they were bad pass rushers, but they were good run defenders. So they could get teams in third and long a lot, and, like, they could just lean on the secondary. That's what they're going to need going forward. Like, we shouldn't expect this pass rush to be great, but if they can stop the run, then they should be able to force more third and longs, and that'll be good long term for this defense. But I think they're going to have to get some kind of pressure on the Saints because otherwise they're capable of carving you up. If you give Derek Carr plenty of time, he could find receivers. That's never been his problem. The problem has been that he can't handle pressure. So I guess we'll see if they can.
You saw what they did against the Cowboys.
Yeah.
You saw what they did against the Panthers. It's all the stars are sort of aligning, though, right? Like you have to be able to get some pressure up the middle of this game, and if you don't really win the battle of the trenches, then it sort of could get ugly. Like it got ugly against the Saints last year in Week 18, the last time the Falcons played them. Remember the Saints hung 48 points on them?
Yeah.
And that was with Pete Carmichael as offensive coordinator. I feel like Clint Kubiak is a bit of an upgrade in that sense. But yeah, definitely. I expect more from the D line this week. Now I think we will get it, if for no reason other than the Saints are have just as many issues along their offensive line if not more when it comes to injuries as the Falcons. So I feel like the Falcons are also catching them at a pretty good time, given that the Eagles gave you a bit of a blueprint on how to stop them last week, and also they have these injuries. Alvin Kamara seems a little bit banged up, even though he probably will play, and then Demario Davis may or may not play. That's up in the air right now. So Falcons have to go out and take care of business, especially at home. Like, this is a huge game.
Yeah.
If you lose this game, you're 2 back of the Saints. You have a very quick turnaround. You have to play the Bucks. Luckily, you don't have to travel. You're playing that game at home as well. They're going to be honoring Matt Ryan that night, which will be really cool. The way that they honored Arthur Blank last week and with the induction into the Ring of Honor. But yeah, it's huge. The other very underrated aspect about this game, which I saw through some research, was all-time season series is on the line. And I know that that's secondary, but not really. Like, I feel that's very important. That's still
critical.
Very important to have that head-to-head win-loss record against the Saints. Right now it's 55-55. If the Saints win, it will be the first time they will have led at any point in the season series since it was 1-0. When they won the first ever game against the Falcons in 1967. Then after that, the Falcons rattled off 7 straight wins, and then they never looked back. So the ancestors,
a lot on the line. Yeah.
The old Falcons teams of the past, do it for them too. Like, we can't let the Saints take the lead in this. We need to shift the pendulum back in our favor.
Yeah, but this is for the team's honor, okay? This is a critical junction. We got to have this win. Like, there's no way, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, okay? You can dick around the first 3 games, you can lose to the Chiefs, you can lose that stupid-ass game to Arthur Smith in week 1, okay? I'll let that go. You can't lose to the Saints, ever, okay? There's no excuses. We can't be losing to the New Orleans Saints. Now, this New Orleans Saints team is not the pushover that people thought they were going to be, myself included, going into the season. We need to make sure that the NFL knows they're frauds, right? We need to come out and put that clown makeup on this Saints team in our building with the red helmets. Falcons are 10-3 in the red helmets. All right, we got to keep that streak going too. We gotta take this team down and make it, because if we lose this game, there's going to be questions, right, for this team. We need to make sure the questions are not being directed at the Falcons. We've faced enough questions, okay? I'm tired of having to answer the questions for this team. We need to be putting this on New Orleans in our building and sending them home with that big division L. And I just think that they got to get this win. I think this is one of the most critical games on the schedule for me.
No, for sure. And I feel like it's one of those where whoever loses, it's going to incite panic in that fan base. Like no matter what, if the Saints lose, then they'll be coming back down to earth. People will, depending on how they lose, people will possibly be seeing them as frauds. Started off 2-0. Now all of a sudden they're at 2-2 with 2 straight conference L's. Whereas if the Falcons lose, you're 1-3. You're 2 games back with the Saints. You're possibly 2 games back with the Buccaneers. And all of a sudden, at 1-2, said it at the top of the show, you're on schedule given what the first 3 games were. 1-3 isn't on schedule. 1-3 is very much off schedule, and 1-3 is very much like you're starting to dig yourself a dangerous hole at this point, especially when you talk about losing divisional home games. And it can start to get a bit nasty if you then turn around and don't get the job done against the Buccaneers at home, because then all of a sudden 1-5, now it's full-blown panic. And that's full-blown panic that's very justified. But yeah, very much a huge game against the Saints at home. You took care of business against them last year, and this is a team that sort of clowned you last season as well in Week 18. I kind of hope that some of these players remember that, and I kind of hope that they don't let that go, because remember, it was a big story about clowning Arthur Smith, sure, but that was sort of a bush league move at the end of that game, where they lined up for the kneel down and they punched it into the end zone. Like, I hope that they don't let that go, and I hope that they go out there with the chip on their shoulder, not just because they're playing the Saints, but because these guys made you look like fools in Week 18 last year.
Yeah, that's like the ultimate like disrespectful like move. I mean, like their coach even came out and was like, "Yeah, I did not sign off on that nonsense." Like running a play out of victory formation. I mean, we talked about it last year. Like that is like one of the biggest like taboos in the NFL and football in general, because it's like an implicit agreement between the offense and defense. You're in victory. We're not going to rush you. The game's over. We're going to like, we don't want any injuries. We're just going to like chill out. And when you score, like when you run a play to score from victory, like it is like a giant betrayal of trust. I mean, I know these two teams hate each other, but still, I mean, it's like, Game of Thrones spoilers, okay, coming, guys. So if you haven't watched Game of Thrones and you want to 10 years later, this is your time to mute for the next 10 seconds. Like, that's like giving guest rights to people that you're hosting for a wedding and then shooting them with a crossbow in the face, and it curses your entire family for generations and so and so. It's basically the NFL equivalent of that. Obviously, no one was killed, so it's not that bad. But no one was killed in Game of Thrones either. It's fictional. So, in that way, it's definitely as big of a deal. But yeah, I mean, they got to make them pay for that little stunt. They need to put like 50 on them this week. Probably not going to happen, but I will accept a W instead. That's my final answer, though.
Yeah, I mean, just win, right? Just come out of there. If you're sitting here a week from today and we're talking about this team is at 2-2, then it'll all be good. Like 2-2, you're still on schedule. The Falcons technically from this point forward have the easiest schedule in the NFL, and I know they had the easiest schedule on paper coming into the season, but so far win-loss record, they have played the hardest schedule in the NFL.
Yeah.
The Eagles, Chiefs, and Steelers are combined 8-1, and the one loss is the game that the Falcons beat the Eagles on. So, if Saquon Barkley doesn't drop that pass, the first 3 weeks of the season, the Falcons are playing 3 teams that are combined 9-0. But luckily it's 8-1. With some more luck, it would have been 7-2. But yeah, the Falcons have gone through the toughest portion of their schedule. It's a lot of cupcakes on paper moving forward, but you have to put yourself in position to take advantage of that
Yep.
weak schedule. And to do that, you have to win these division games because
Yep.
if you lose your division games, it doesn't matter what the schedule is. It doesn't matter what you do in the rest of the season for the most part. Uh, these games are going to matter a lot down the stretch. They matter a lot for team morale right now, for the morale of the fan base. But there's a lot of tiebreakers on the line, and this is one of those where winning or losing will be looked back on in week 17, week 18, and you may look back on this one and you're like, man, I really wish they would have had that one, at
Yeah.
home. That would have made all the difference. So let's not be in that position. Let's go out there and let's take care of business against those street pissers from New Orleans, and let's send them home as the proven frauds that they are.
Yeah. No, I think that's a necessity. And, I think a big part of that, I think like, the defense is fine. Just play well this week. I have total confidence in the defense to do a good job. We need the offense to really step it up, and it's going to be hard with two new offensive linemen in there. Like this is not an easy task. The NFL is not easy. You gotta make progress. You gotta take a step forward. I do want to give Zach Robinson credit that I think he's I think taken steps every week. We're still far from where we need to be overall, but I think we need Zach Robinson to take another step. We need, and I know Ray Moon asked this, saying, I'm sure with the $2, thank you, Ray, says, we should be 3-0. We need Zach Robinson to be better. Yeah, and I think that's the crux. Like, we need more help from the scheme than ever before now with two offensive linemen out. We can't just line up and beat somebody. You can't really do that in the NFL anyway, but in particular now with offensive line issues, potentially, you have to find a way to outsmart your opponent. And I think we have seen some improvements to the Falcons offense, small improvements. The running game really struggled against the Chiefs. They got to figure out a way to get back on the horse in the run game, and they got to string some drives together. They got to do better on early downs, whatever that looks like. Maybe they, run the ball better. Maybe they get a short passing game that's not exclusively screens together. I mean, I've seen enough screens already. Like, we can't just keep running that screen, because after the second time you hit that screen, they're charging it every time. So maybe build a play off of the screen. I mean, we have seen that sometimes. So they need to get some more juice offensively. They need to do better on early downs. But I think if they can figure that out, and the offense can take a step forward, and the defense can do more like what we expect them to do, then I think this team will come away with a win on Sunday. But if that offense struggles again and the defense doesn't get any better against the run, it's going to be another tough fight where we're sort of hoping for last minute heroics to win. And that's not a sustainable way to win in the NFL.
No, it's not. And you made the point about third downs. The team is 30th in the NFL in third down conversions this season. Uh, Third to last. There's 32 teams in the NFL. Being ranked in the three whatever is very bad no matter what. I think they've converted 22.2% of their third downs. It's been atrocious. And yeah, that does start with those early downs. Like, you cannot be in so many third and long scenarios, and it's something that we've seen plague the team over these first three games. Uh, it's a big difference, right? It's all about staying on schedule. That's always been the key rule in the NFL as a play caller, like the golden rule. You have to stay on schedule, limit negative plays. Get it in third down and 4 or less, or preferably third down and 3 or less. And the team has not done a good job of that so far. And hopefully we will see better results moving forward, especially we've seen Kirk Cousins. I think Kirk Cousins is getting healthier by the week. I think he's doing more and more with each passing week. You can tell that he's not 100%, and I feel like you could tell that based on that 3rd down and 2 that we saw last week, where he had a lane, he had the time, and he just waited too long and did not run. He didn't scamper for that 1st down. It ended up being very costly because the Falcons had to punt the ball away.
Yeah.
Um, it could be, we speculated about whether or not it was a mental thing with Kirk Cousins where he just sort of has to do it at least once, and then it'll sort of unlock. Because I think that was the case in that Eagles game where he, threw that touchdown pass to Darnell Mooney down the field, and after that he's been a new quarterback. Like the the difference between Kirk Cousins before that singular play and after that play has been night and day. Like, we were speculating whether or not Kirk Cousins should even be on the field before that play, given what we saw from him in that Steelers game and in the first half of that Eagles game. And it could be mental, and hopefully as Kirk Cousins, you know, continues to get healthier, and hopefully as uh, you know, Robinson continues to, get his feet under him, because after all, he is still a first time play caller. I think we should give him some leeway when it comes to that. Hopefully it just gets better over time. They get into a better rhythm. I know I beat the preseason horse to death, and I feel like we both beat the preseason horse to death. But Zach Robinson did come out today in uh, after practice, or in his interview today, and he said that, yeah, we're still working through finding our rhythm, working through some stuff. We had OTAs, we had training camp, and now we have to sort of do it in game action. And as I was reading that, I was just thinking to myself, like, would have been nice to, work through some of that in a live game setting, in an exhibition that doesn't really count. But, the team decided to rest their starters all preseason. And honestly, I think now they're paying for it. I think they have severely paid for it, especially given that it was a brand new offensive scheme, a brand new defensive scheme, and we saw it with all the mistakes they made against the Steelers. And I'm hard pressed to think that this team wouldn't be in a better spot now if they didn't give their starters run in the preseason. But that's just me continuing to beat a dead horse at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. They've clearly made the decision that they'd rather rest starters for health purposes. So that's what we're going to see. But there are consequences, right? You keep players healthier, but you're going to have a slower start, more than likely. So, if they can work through it and finish really strong, which they did not do once under Arthur Smith. They basically, crumbled in the middle of the season pretty much every single year under Arthur Smith. Then they'll be okay. Like, if you can tolerate a slow start, if you can finish strong. So that's what we're hoping for. And I think this gauntlet that we've got over the next 3 weeks, this is going to tell us a lot about this team and where they stand in the NFC. The NFC is wide open. The 49ers are incredibly vulnerable. We just beat the Eagles, and that team has looked far from problem. I mean, the Eagles are going to be the most hot and cold team, I think, in the league this year. They're going to be unstoppable some weeks, and what we saw against the Saints last week, other weeks. But I mean, the Cowboys are a mess.
Yeah.
The Vikings look really good. That's probably the biggest surprise. Kevin O'Connell's a great coach. I mean, I shouldn't be so shocked by that. But I mean, outside of the Vikings, there's really not. I mean, I think two of the biggest surprises in the NFC were the Saints and the Bucs. And the Bucs got their ass kicked by the Broncos. They got annihilated by the Broncos. And that is not a great football team. So, I mean, the Saints and the Bucs both kind of got slapped around and brought back to reality this week. The Falcons, I think, have kind of looked like maybe, I mean, they've played the toughest schedule. Maybe, the Bucks win against the Lions might be the most impressive win of any teams this in the South so far. I mean, we'll see how that Lions team looks too. But like, the NFC's wide open. If the Falcons like can get it together and finish strong, I mean, there's no reason this team couldn't be a figure in the NFC if they do continue to take steps forward. But right, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. This team has a long way to go to being legit. I think that they're on schedule. Like you said, Adnan, I think they're on schedule for being a legitimate playoff contender, but we need to see them become like actual playoff contender, not like projected playoff contender. And that's where this team has always faltered. There's always been like, maybe there's a hope, maybe they could do this or that or whatever. They never get there. They always fall apart. So we need them to actually get there now. And Corey adds with the $2. Thank you, Corey. He says, if Adnan can scale a mountain, then we can beat the Saints. Yeah, I like that positivity. Corey. Yeah.
Mount Fuji wasn't easy, bro. Like it was very rewarding, but goddamn, I was not prepared for that mountain. I still did it, but I did not train for that at all.
Yeah, that looks like an intense. Is that like a multi-day thing, or is that like an all-day thing, or what?
Yeah, it was overall the hike up and the hike down total was like 10 hours.
Jeez.
So we started. We're not talking about football right now. I know, but we started at like, we went from like 5 to 7 the first day, or like 4:30 to 7. Then we like rested in huts, and then we continued from like midnight until like 6 or 7 a.m. And then the descent down was another few hours as well.
Yeah, I'm guessing down's a lot easier on that mountain.
No, you would think so, but the descent was hell from like that descent
dangerous, or yeah,
it was pretty dangerous. Like it's literally just like steep. It's like rock, and you just like you can't walk on it from how steep.
Oh, it's that
really
steep.
have to like slide.
Yeah. Jeez.
Like we should have brought skis. Like you could have skied down that mountain, genuinely.
Yeah. Was there snow on it?
No, there's no snow. Like
okay.
No snow. It was September, so it was very hot. It was very hot in
oh wow, yeah,
Japan while I was over there. But yeah, definitely one of the hardest things I've done physically, but very rewarding. But yeah, absolutely. The donation was spot on.
Yeah. If Adnan can put in that work and grind through, and get that big dub up on Mount Fuji, then we need the Falcons to come through with a big dub against New Orleans. And we can't sully the Red Helmets, okay? We need to keep the Red Helmets strong. They got to win this game just for the Red Helmets. I mean, Evan would be crushed if they lost this game in the Red Helmets. So do it for him, if nothing else. Yeah.
I will say it is a matchup of the 10 and 3s, because the Falcons are 10 and 3 in the Helmets, but the Saints over the last 13 games are 10 and 3 against the Falcons. So that is a disgraceful record by this franchise, and it is a record that has allowed the Saints to, tie the season series, which is a big problem. Obviously, that stems from Christmas Eve of 2017, so the second matchup in 2017 through last season. So it stems, most of the Dan Quinn era, all of the Arthur Smith era, in that season where Raheem Morris took over as interim head coach. I think he played the Saints both times that year in 2020 and lost both games. So, the Falcons have been searching for a coach to be able to consistently beat the Saints. They have not had that since Dan Reeves.
Right. Yeah.
So it's been 2 decades.
Yeah.
So it's Raheem Morris can buy himself a lot of goodwill, within the fan base if he can consistently beat the Saints.
Yeah. I mean, I think last year their win over the Saints gave us hope for like way longer than we should have had. So, win against the Saints can go a long way. Go a long way for this fan base and this team. So they got to get it done. They got to get it done and start this gauntlet off right. Because again, if you get the Saints win, obviously Thursday night football games are always a crapshoot. So you don't want to have to go into that Thursday game desperate for a win. Like that is the worst case scenario. You want to go into that Thursday game wanting a win, but not needing it. And if you lose this Saints game, you need it. So it's not a great setup. But I think if they get the Saints win, you're flying high. You go into that Thursday game, and you got a great chance at starting 2-0 in the division and getting above 500. So and I think if this team can get above 500, they might not ever go back to a losing record this season. So the longer it takes them to get there, the dicier the season's going to be, I think. So
also, just looking ahead to that game, the Bucs are playing the Eagles this weekend. The Eagles will certainly be favored in that game, even though it is in Tampa. So, if you play your cards right this weekend, that game against the Bucs on Thursday night will be for sole possession of first place in the NFC South, possibly. If the Eagles get the job done as well, and the Falcons are calling upon the Eagles to do them another favor this weekend. So hopefully, Saquon and the boys can get it done. But yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice going into that Thursday night game, at 2-2, and then to, win that game the night that your greatest player in franchise history is being inducted into the Ring of Honor. That's also a red helmet game.
Yep.
So back-to-back red helmet games, which is hopefully a sign of things to come. Where I'm with Evan on this one. I hope that this team permanently makes that change to the red helmets, and I'm hoping that this team changes these jerseys, which I never really liked. But that's a conversation for the off.
It's an off-season. I do think they're going to change the jerseys. I don't know what they're going to look like, but I do think they're going to change the jerseys. The fact that they already got rid of the gradient, which I think the gradient was not the biggest problem, certainly. So, I think the gradient was actually cool.
Let's bring back those 80s joints. You don't even need to do anything new. Just bring back those Steve Bartkowski 80s red jerseys, red helmets, and I'll be very content and satisfied. Those jerseys were absolutely stunning. And then run the 90s jerseys as a throwback or as an alternate if you want.
Yeah, no, they got a lot of ways they could go with this. Yeah, the 2010s alternates are the black Vic jerseys, I think, were one of my favorites for sure. But I don't know what they're gonna do, but I think they're gonna do something. So hopefully it'll be good.
Corey, you're right. I know the 80s were a rough time, but man, the team looked good losing all those games.
That was the only thing we had. was those jerseys. So, but guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Falcoholic Live, episode 302. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Leave that 5-star review in your podcast platform of choice. If you want to support the show, you can do so joining up on Patreon, joining up here on YouTube channel memberships. We will be back with a Saints game preview show coming out on Friday, and then, of course, the post-game show on Sunday after the conclusion of the game. Before we sign off, I want to thank, of course, my co-host, Adnan Ikic. Welcome back. He's at Say Which Way. Anything else you want to let the people know about Adnan?
Yeah, I'm running my weekly series, What If Falcons Win or Lose? That's going this weekend. Series history going this weekend. And Fantasy Stud and Dud goes a day after, or a couple days after each game, looking at fantasy football implications. So yeah, check that out and check out Falcoholic.com.
Absolutely, guys. Check that out. I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. You can find my stuff and all our written content at thefalcoholic.com. Thanks again to BetOnline for sponsoring the show. Yeah, guys, we will be back in a couple days, and Hate Week is in full swing, so get out there and make some Saints fans mad, and hopefully we'll make them even madder on Sunday. That's my hope. Until then, guys, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening. We will see you guys next time on the Falcoholic Live and Dirty